Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Royce, and I'm the Director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships here at the Department of Health and Human Services. We are so glad that you've joined us for today's webinar presentation, Driving Out the Darkness, Faith-Based and Community Organizations Preventing Human Trafficking. During our time together, we will have a chance to hear how faith-based and community groups can and are preventing and responding to slavery and human trafficking in our communities and around the world. The Partnership Center works to support faith and community leaders with timely information, best practice sharing, and resources that we hope will help strengthen our community partners' capacity to address critical issues such as human trafficking, which some refer to as modern-day slavery. That connection is particularly important since we are having this webinar on a day recognized as National Freedom Day. Today is a reminder that the United States is a nation dedicated to the ideal of freedom. On this day, in 1865, President Lincoln signed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, outlawing slavery in the United States. And today, we remember that there are still people here in the United States and around the globe being forced into labor and sex trafficking and suffering under oppression and strife, who yearn for the freedom we hold up as one of the core ideals of our nation. That's why I'm so pleased to introduce you to our speakers on this call today, who are going to share with us ways that faith-based and community leaders and organizations can be involved in bringing that freedom to as many people as possible. The groups and leaders we have on the call today are a shining example of this work, and I know you will enjoy hearing from them. First, we're going to hear from Catherine Chon, the founding director of the Office on Trafficking in Persons, also known as OTIP, within ACF, also known as the Administration for Children and Families. We have lots of acronyms around here. Catherine advises the Assistant Secretary by providing subject matter expertise and leadership of anti-trafficking activities within ACF. OTIP is responsible for the development of anti-trafficking strategies, policies, and programs to prevent human trafficking, build health and human service capacity to respond to human trafficking, increase victim identification and access to services, and strengthen health and well-being outcomes for survivors of human trafficking. So as you can see, their role is quite significant. After Catherine, we'll hear from Ashley Chapman from the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice. Ashley and her organization are working to encourage whole communities, including faith-based and community organizations, to come together to address human trafficking. Through their work, communities are seeing that there is so much more they can do when organizations work together to move beyond simple awareness to real action. After Catherine, we have a very special treat today to get to hear from Representative Linda Smith, co-founder and president of Shared Hope International. Representative Smith is known as a leader in the global movement in sex trafficking, and she will be sharing how her organization works to address human trafficking in partnership with other faith-based and community organizations. I know I, for one, am really excited to learn about their work. So before we hear from these great speakers, let me turn it back over to Ben Odell on our team so that he can go over a few housekeeping items that he needs to review with you. Ben?
Thank you so much, Shannon. So this is an educational webinar today, which is off the record and not intended for press purposes. If you're a member of the press, please disconnect, and we'll be happy to connect with you with our press office here at HHS for the program. We welcome your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. You should see a control panel on your screen with a text box in the lower right-hand corner. Please use that box to type in your questions and comments throughout the webinar. And I don't know if somebody can hear this, I'll be getting back, but I see we have a question already about audio. If you're having trouble with audio throughout the webinar, feel free to switch over to your phone line. This sometimes can provide audio. Another thing is to make sure the volume is increased on whatever device you're listening to the webinar on today. So as a part of connecting and working together to make sure people can hear and connect and share questions, I want to invite everybody to go ahead and type in what city and state you're participating from today. Use that chat feature, type right in what your city and state phone number is, or not city and state phone number, city and state. Let us know where you're participating from today. I see Kentucky, Texas, Washington, D.C., North Carolina, Connecticut, Georgia, Philadelphia. Hey, go Eagles. We got that this weekend. That's a good point. Georgia, Wisconsin. So really, we have so many people from all around the country participating today. Thank you so much. We appreciate having participants from so many different parts of the country. If anyone's having trouble with your audio, feel free to switch over to your phone line. We are also recording the webinar today. And so if you have any trouble throughout or you miss a part, we'll be glad to follow up and make sure that recording is available. Also, we can share the recording with key partners and stakeholders so that they can come back and listen to this presentation again. As a note for that, we will be sending that recording to everyone who's participating today, along with resources and tools that we think might be key for you to know about and want to encourage you to check out. So thank you so much for being with us today. Let me turn it over to Catherine for us to hear a little bit about the Office of Trafficking in Persons. Catherine?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Shannon, for partnering with us on this webinar. And while I'm thanking colleagues, a special thank you to Anna Pilato, our Deputy Assistant Secretary for External Affairs here at the Administration for Children and Families. So what I would like to do today is provide a few of the resources that the Office on Trafficking in Persons implements through grant programming and other program activities, so that faith-based and community organizations are aware of the tools that they have to engage in their local anti-trafficking fight. And I also wanted to provide two examples, one of a faith-based organization and another of a community organization. They're two of our grantees, and I wanted to give you an example of some of the work that they're doing on the ground, because I have a sense that there are some who are participating in this webinar that are already engaged on anti-trafficking efforts, and others may be fairly new to the issue. So first, to start with a few simple ways that faith-based and community organizations can help to prevent and end trafficking. I wanted to start with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. There's a lot that local organizations can do to raise awareness about the existence of the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Since 2007, the hotline has reported more than 35,000 cases of potential trafficking across the United States and the U.S. territories. And this year, HHS is going to be increasing public awareness and outreach efforts to faith-based and community organizations to strengthen our national response to human trafficking. So we will have new posters, brochures, other materials. Faith-based and community organizations can take part in the HHS Look Beneath the Surface public awareness campaign and get involved in raising awareness about the hotline, which will also expand its services to include text messaging and social media access for help. The second resource that I wanted to mention is that there is a lot that you can do to learn more about how to identify victims of trafficking and respond appropriately to human trafficking in your local context. So you may already be working with populations in need who may also be at high risk for human trafficking. So one of the programs that HHS offers is the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center. We provide training for healthcare providers, for human service organizations to identify the complex needs of victims of trafficking and respond appropriately, and also to assess some of the root causes that may make individuals, families, and communities vulnerable to human trafficking, and that differs from community to community. So last week, as an example, we actually, earlier this week, we provided a webinar on the intersection of human trafficking and the opioid crisis, because many of our anti-trafficking grantees have been providing assistance and service referrals for victims of trafficking that also experience substance use issues, including for opioids. So to give you an example, in last fiscal year, 2017, a subset of our grantees provided over 232 instances of substance use treatment, making it one of the top 10 service needs that they provided to victims. So faith-based and community-based organizations are really important to this effort as well, and I'd be happy to answer questions on what we're learning from our grantees, including some anecdotal stories of how human traffickers are increasingly recruiting through drug rehabilitation programs and using opioids and other substances as methods of control and recruitment to further victimize individuals. The third resource I wanted to mention is one of our grant programs, the Trafficking Victims Assistance Program, is a program specifically providing assistance to foreign victims of human trafficking, and any local organization that has capacity to provide assistance to victims can enroll as a subrecipient of that grant program at any point. So we have 3 primary grantees that are responsible for different regions of the country. And if you go to our website, and we'll provide details after this webinar, if you go to our website, you'll see the regional coverage. And in this last fiscal year, this national network of grantees and local subrecipient organizations assisted more than 1,500 victims of human trafficking and some of their family members. So through this funding, a subrecipient organization can support survivors of trafficking by providing long-term housing, substance abuse, mental health counseling, education, job training, financial counseling, and other types of services. So that's one particular federal funding stream to support that. And then finally, you can support your local anti-trafficking task force or coalition. So many cities and counties across the United States have multidisciplinary task forces or coalitions, and faith-based and community organizations are already involved in most of them. And so if there's a particular expertise that you would want to bring to your local coalition, we encourage local organizations to participate, and the Department of Justice has a list of some of their task forces. And you can also learn about other community-led coalitions by calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline or contacting them. You can email them at help@humantraffickinghotline.org as one example of reaching them. So on to 2 examples of grantees who've been making a difference in their local communities. The first example is I wanted to give a spotlight to a subrecipient of the Trafficking Victims Assistance Program that I had referenced just a few minutes ago. It's the Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, and they have demonstrated several strengths that they bring to their local anti-trafficking efforts. So first, they have built strong community trust. They are members of the Houston Anti-Trafficking Coalition and provide services and referrals to victims of trafficking locally. They have long-standing expertise serving refugees and other populations in need, and so they have a pre-existing network of connections and processes, and have identified other community-based resources to help fit the multiple needs that survivors of human trafficking have. They have additional services, for example, a Blessed Beginnings program, which provides prenatal classes in English and Spanish for clients who are expecting mothers and fathers. So looking at the longer-term needs of survivors of trafficking. And even in response to disaster relief efforts after Hurricane Harvey, the organization was involved in the city's efforts to conduct outreach and connect survivors of trafficking to safe shelter and access to food and water. And so those are just some of the benefits that survivors of trafficking can gain through faith-based organizations, not just through the services funded by federal grant funding, but also all the in-kind and other resources that organizations are able to collect through the local efforts. So the second example I wanted to spotlight is a grantee or a partnership under our Domestic Victims of Human Trafficking grant program. So the Justice Research Institute in Boston also demonstrates several strengths that community-based organizations offer. So for example, similar to the first example, they've also developed have well-developed partnerships and networks in their local community. So they're in Boston, they work with law enforcement, social service providers, healthcare partners to build the capacity of the broader community across multiple systems of care so that domestic victims of trafficking can meet their comprehensive needs, because no agency can do it alone, and that's why we rely on community organizations to know the strengths and resources in their local community. Second, they have the capacity to tailor their services based on the research, the community-based research that they've done to understand how trafficking networks operate. So for example, they've conducted a recent assessment and looked at the high risks for victimization by youth involved in the child welfare system, young adults aging out of the child welfare system. They've analyzed their trends in the local opioid addiction issues, and then that has helped them to target where they do outreach and how to reduce risks for future victimization. They have a really good understanding of the other underserved populations in the community that traffickers are proactively targeting, and they've identified needs for specialized housing services, particularly for youth victims of sex trafficking. So those are just two of many examples of how faith-based and community organizations are assisting victims of trafficking every day, connecting across the community, and working to really understand what the nuances of trafficking, recruitment, and victimization look like in their local community to help strengthen the nation's response to human trafficking. And with that, I will end this portion of the agenda and turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you, Catherine, for all of that information, and it's lovely to be with everybody on the call today. So our work with the Engage Together initiative, so you can learn more about that at engagetogether.com, is just to do exactly what that phrase means: help communities engage together across sectors in order to eradicate human trafficking in their community and to prevent it. And I want to land on that point for a moment, because human trafficking and its presence in any community, we see this as the end result. It's the darkest consequence of leaving people in such vulnerable places in your community that kind of exploitation can take hold. And so any strategy as a community to combat human trafficking must always simultaneously be taking a look at what are the vulnerabilities that are driving that evil thing to exist in your community. And every community is going to look a little bit different. So it could be that your community is struggling with labor trafficking of foreign nationals, or your community is struggling with homeless and runaway youth. And so both of those will be, and if those homeless and runaway youth are being predominantly trafficked for sexual exploitation. So you have to look at what are the driving vulnerabilities as a community, as well as what is that end result, what is the type of trafficking that we're dealing with. And in many cities across the United States of America, you may have a confluence of all of those things. And so if you've been in this fight for very long, or if you've done some Google researching or trying to pull ideas about how do you engage as a faith-based partner, as a church, as a community resource, you may see things like, here are 10 things that you need to do to combat trafficking. And those 10 things are sort of centering in on some critical moments. But what you need to understand is that human trafficking, in order to truly eradicate it, it's about 1,000 things that need to be happening in your community in order to make it cease, in order to stop it from happening ever again. And not to get overwhelmed by the fact that that is true, that there are 1,000 things we've got to be doing, but to realize that, one, that opens so many doors to opportunities for faith-based and community organizations to come alongside our law enforcement, our task forces, our coalitions, and really fill in those gaps of what's needed, both to protect the vulnerable and to combat human trafficking, to provide what's needed during a rescue of an individual or their restoration journey, and to realize that we truly need each other. So churches need to be engaged, and community civic groups need to be engaged, and businesses need to be engaged, but not in silos. They've got to engage together. And so one of some critical points that we work with communities to understand, and we are on the road about 48 weeks every year, helping communities all over this country and around the globe understand these concepts and begin to build those bridges of communication, of collaboration, and of a unified vision. And the thing to remember, some really critical things to remember are, when you're looking at, say, a church or even a business or a civic group, we have the tendency to think of that as an entity, and it is. And so how would X church and X city, as an entity, get mobilized to serve on behalf of combating human trafficking or protecting those in harm's way? But you also have to think of it as your members as well. So you're in a church, you have many different members who represent many different skill sets and professions and talents. And how could those get deployed in a community? The same would be true for a business. The same would be true for a civic group like a Rotary Club or Junior League Club. How will you as an entity engage this and come alongside those who are already serving in your community? And how will you deploy your members to step into this work? The other thing to remember is that to combat human trafficking successfully in a community, it requires not just collaboration, but a comprehensive approach. And so it's an issue of, in our frameworks, and we have lots of these resources and explanations online on our website, but in our framework, that includes everything from prevention to identification, rescue, restoration, and reform. All of that needs to be taking place simultaneously in your community in order to eradicate this issue. If any one of those pieces is missing, then we will lose the fight. And so we have to kind of step back for a second and realize that in this country, we recognize the presence of human trafficking internationally first. Now it was in 2000, 2001, and we recognized its presence and began to build up the infrastructure to tackle this on our own soil in about 2008. So we're just a decade old in the fight. So a lot of communities rushed to, when they learned that human trafficking was present in their community, rushed to trying to rescue individuals, and they realized we're not finding those individuals. But it wasn't an issue of not being able to find it. They didn't know how to identify it. And so the trainings needed to start taking place. And there are really phenomenal resources for this for every different profession. But in your community, everyone in a position to come in contact with a human trafficking victim or to perhaps see a human trafficking situation taking place needs to know what it is that they're seeing and what protocol to follow, to know that National Human Trafficking Resource Hotline and the local coalition hotlines, and who in your law enforcement locally is the one tasked to help that individual, and what are the services that are now available to connect that individual to. And in order to take that comprehensive sort of understanding of the issue all the way down to the local context, the other very important thing to understand for any community, and we see that this is really where things begin to break down when a community is trying to combat this, and that is that you've got to do a community assessment, a holistic community assessment of who is already engaged in this work in every sector, what businesses, what civic groups, what faith-based ministries and churches, what nonprofits, taking a look at and unearthing everything that's going on in your community already, matching that against everything that actually needs to happen, that comprehensive strategy, and beginning to see, wow, okay, here's where we're very strong, but here are gaps in services. Here are gaps in the type of individuals we're capable of serving today, and yet we have a whole other demographic that's not being served. Or here's a gap in the services that are needed in this specific area of our city that are not available yet, that are desperately needed. So how will you as a community collaborate to fill in those gaps to make sure that as an entity yourself, you're enhancing what you're already doing in order to combat this issue, in order to protect those in harm's way, that you're coming alongside those who are already in the field. So one of the key things that happens is when someone first becomes aware of the issue of human trafficking, their tendency is either to close their eyes and shut their ears because, my goodness, that's so dark, it's so complex, how could I possibly make an impact? So we have people in that space. But then others will say, oh my goodness, I've got to get up today and do something. And so they'll dive in. And without understanding and doing that community assessment, going on ahead and seeing what's already out there in your local community and even out there nationally, what we end up doing is a couple of things. We may create duplicative efforts where we could have been more refined in how we serve the community, or we create solutions that actually don't quite work, and we don't know that because we haven't taken a look at other cities that maybe try to implement that thing and why that became a challenge or a barrier to actually doing what you wanted to do. So it's critically important to understand strategy, understand the possibilities of what you could do as a civic group or a business or a faith-based community or just even as an individual professional, and then to contextualize that, to drive that down to the local community level, do that community assessment, do that homework, and try to figure out how will you do all of those things, enhance, come alongside, and fill gaps in your community, both as an entity and as the members that make up your organization. So one of the things that we have built that we work with communities all the time to help them implement is our Engage Together Toolkit series. So we wanted to be able to speak to very specific cohorts in a community about what it is and how it is that they are uniquely positioned to combat human trafficking and protect the vulnerable. So our toolkit series, you can learn more about this on our website, is we have 4 very specific ones. So we have one for churches, we have one for community groups, we have one for university and educators, and another for businesses. And we're coming out with brand new toolkits across that whole spectrum right now. In the next couple of weeks, those will go live. But what these toolkits do is they help you explore the possibilities related to your specific area of service in your community where you're uniquely positioned. And so, for instance, for a church, we would say, okay, church, take a look at all of the things you could consider doing to prevent human trafficking. All the things you need to be considering in order to identify it, in order to help when someone, an individual in your community is rescued. How will you wrap around and make sure they're okay and provided with all their needs? In their restoration journey, what does that look like? Even in reforms, what does that look like? And so we take each cohort, churches, business, educators, and then just community groups at large or concerned citizens, and we walk you through that. But we're not just giving you action items through those toolkits to consider, and those action items are based on our research across the whole country of what's working really very well in cities across America. So we've distilled some very strong action items. But what it also comes with is a whole online resource library. So if we're going to tell you, hey, you should consider this action item in your community, we're going to back that up with a resource that's readily available or with a program that you might want to take a look at to see how that works. And so that's that whole possibilities realm, that whole world of possibilities for you. That's what we created those toolkits for. We also have a how to do a community assessment online course, and you can find that on our website even today. And that will show you how will you unearth all of these different assets that your community may have, and how will you figure out a way to collaborate across sectors. So that's what that's for, and it comes with a guide and templates and charts and just so many resources that will hopefully equip you to walk through this. For churches specifically, for faith-based communities, You're meeting weekly. You're a whole bunch of wonderful people who are passionate about this issue who are meeting regularly. So what we created for you specifically was a teaching series. And this teaching series is media driven. It has a facilitator's guide, and in 8 sessions, it walks a group of people through your church, and some churches are going through it all together, through each of those steps, understanding what human trafficking is, understanding how to do a community assessment, and then through each of those pieces of that strategy, prevention, identification, rescue, etc. So that at the end of those 8 sessions, you have an action plan that's informed. You have done that community assessment, so you know who to walk alongside. And we've had churches of 40,000 going through this and churches of about 75 in rural counties. It works in urban, rural settings, large, small churches, whole churches, small groups within churches. But it will help you create an action plan so that you can move from awareness to action. So I'm going to pause here and hand this over for a moment to Lucy Bloom, who's on the call. Lucy is a survivor advocate as well, and she has served with such excellence in government and in local areas. But she has been involved with a lot of churches in her community who have been walking alongside this, and community members at large, to try to work together. And she's joining us to give us some specific examples of that. Lucy?
Yes, thank you, Ashley and Catherine. Both of what you have shared with us today has been not only insightful, but some tangible resources to help equip the faith-based communities for how they can prevent human trafficking. And I love the title of this whole webinar, Driving Out the Darkness, which does indeed mean we have to go and we have to shine light. So I love this whole vision of let's move from awareness to action. And I have some good examples to share, so it won't take much time because I know we want to get to hearing Linda as Representative Smith as well. But I did want to share some of what has happened in Kansas City, as we have had many churches utilizing the Engage Together Toolkit series and learning how they can collaborate with one another. Our awareness has been that victims of human trafficking represent some of the most vulnerable, marginalized, and underserved people in our communities. And it is important, if we are really going to be able to drive out this darkness, that we do have a strategic, concerted effort with all of us intentionally working together. And so as we did our community-wide assessment, we weren't just unearthing who is out there, but what exactly are they doing and for who are they doing it? And again, so that we could assess where gaps are, but we also wanted to assess where are all of our resources in our community so that we could spread them out and make sure that we are getting services to as many people as possible. So we've been able to facilitate collaboration at an individual level at the time when somebody is identified and be able to help them to safely exit and to access recovery. But then at the broader level, we've been able to create partnerships between various churches and community partners and nonprofits as they work together to share resources, to raise funds for implementation of larger community-wide projects. And if we're truly going to drive out this darkness, we're going to address demand. It's not just, there are great needs of victims that have to be addressed, but we also want to prevent this from happening again, which means we have to drive out demand. And this is where we have had some tremendous efforts on behalf of the faith-based community with nonprofits and even with government. And so it's been exciting to see that happening. One example is we had the EPIC project here. It's actually an ongoing project where they intercept people calling in to make a purchase and educate them about what is trafficking and educate them about the crime and hopefully to deter them. And so we are in the middle of that project now. There's been several men's education efforts. And then we also have many churches getting engaged with our various organizations, providing funding for services, but also volunteering, helping even to provide transportation is such a huge assistance to victims. If you can just think about everything that they don't have access to when they're coming out of a situation where they have been trafficked, all of those things provide opportunity for pro bono services of all sorts. And where they can't be pro bono, if they're reduced and that type of thing, we have seen churches coming alongside individuals and helping to pay for those services, because after all, we do understand that the cost of somebody staying in that situation is much greater than the cost of being able to really help them become economically independent and to heal. We also have churches and community organizations that are helping provide building space to nonprofits. They're also providing staff time, and again, that goes back to pro bono services, but we actually have organizations that are saying, our staff, this staff member, we will pay their full time, but they can come and work for you half-time, which has been a tremendous help. Also, they're getting engaged with aftercare. There's an organization called The Open Table, where it trains individuals to come around a brother or sister who is forging their way in their recovery and in becoming economically independent. And they are literally a mentoring team for them for a whole year. We have churches that are helping us collaborate in finding creative housing solutions, because affordable housing is a huge problem in Kansas City as well as in other areas of the country. So truly, as Ashley has stated, there is so much room for collaboration. There's actually more work to be done right now at this point than we have people to do it. And so it really is, how do we have that strategy, that structure that will kind of allow us all to agree on the vision and find our next steps forward? And this is where the Toolkit series has been so important to forwarding this work. So thank you all for allowing me to share a few examples.
Thank you, Lucy. And Ben, I'll pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the work you guys are doing. It's been amazing to learn more about your guys' organization and the effort to promote collaboration and really help people see how they can work together to meet the needs of this critical population. It's my privilege now to welcome Representative Linda Smith to our call, who's the founder and president of Shared Hope International. Representative Smith, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. Well, we're so glad to hear from you and about the amazing work you guys are doing with Shared Hope. So let me turn the call over to you.
Thank you. Oh, I just am already getting really excited. I loved listening to your last presenter, Ashley, Shannon, Ben, all of you. This would not have happened very few years ago. And I'm writing a history book right now on the specific part of trafficking called domestic minor sex trafficking. And as I go through the fight of people in the late 1800s and early 1900s, I realize that I'm listening today to people like I'm writing about and reading right now. It's pretty amazing, because this is not for the timid. This is not a fight for the timid. I remember my first person that I met who was being sold for commercial sex. And so many of those little girls that I met had also been put into factories to make carpets. And the shock, I was still a member of Congress, and we were between votes. We had 5 votes, or about 5 days, and I got a quick trip, self-funded it. I'd heard from Teen Challenge of Mumbai, India, that there were kids being sold, and I couldn't sleep. So I got on a plane, and I went to look. They took me down into the deepest, ugliest place I've ever been in my life. It smelled like raw sewage, and they introduced me to some of the girls they were ministering to. Some of these girls were teenagers, and Teen Challenge had found their little boys, and they were drug addicted. And sometimes they were just 4, 5, 6 years old, and they were recruiters for their mommies. And they were all owned by a trafficker. And I remember a moment that birthed Shared Hope International. And most of you listening If you haven't had this moment, you will, because you have a God bigger that's going to give you this moment. He never calls you to something that he doesn't give you a call to, an action. And so, you know, I am coming from the point today that I believe there was a moment in my life that has brought me to this day and to being with you. So what I ended up doing there that night is they asked me, because they heard I was a Christian politician. Now, I don't know if they really believed that. I think they thought it was probably not true, the women. But they asked me to pray for a very sick little girl. Well, that wasn't something I was really used to doing, but I thought, well, I know how to do that. Now, in America, I would put my arms on yours, ladies. I would probably put my arms around you. Men, I'd probably put a hand on each of your shoulders. And I would pray for you. But this little girl smelled awful. And she was dirty and likely crawling with things. And I heard in my heart, touch her for me. Now, the reason I say this is these people that we're working with, from the advocates to the people we're called to serve, are not an easy population. And I have been told to go to the hot place by girls that I'm rescuing because there is such an anger in it. And yet, as I touched this little girl, I heard in my heart, touch her for me. And as I did that, I can feel her heartbeat today. And as I was starting to write this book of these advocates, I realized that God has called different people at different times to do different things. That we that are on the call today and you that are listening are being called to stand on the shoulders of people that came before us. We have discovered something, and often in the movement where we have a problem, especially, I would say, in the faith community, we act like we started whatever it was. None of us did. From the beginning of time, there's been oppression. But there was a time in America where we, the activists, looked different. Around the end of the 18th century, in the early 1910s, there was a group of people, and it sounds like us a bit. Now, what I found in America was very similar to what I found in India. I've done a lot of research for the U.S. government. After I left Congress, I've run 3 different nonprofits. One researched, went inside the markets as if we were buyers or the buyers or sellers or tourist operators. And that research was given back to the U.S. government. So at one point, I decided, I was being mocked a little bit at some of the international forums on, why don't you study America? So I added America to one of the studies, and we went inside. What I found in India was these girls were being sold to pretty ordinary Indian men. Some were being brought from Bangladesh, Nepal, other places, but in general, they didn't have to go very far to find vulnerable girls who were devalued. And that's what was populating. They weren't old, they didn't live that long in most cases, but they were going younger and younger, and men were demanding younger and younger for the compliance that they wanted for their fantasies. In America, we found the same thing. And they were middle school girls in these research projects. We had adults, we had other kind of trafficking. But when it came to sex trafficking, I was finding predominantly in the 14 areas of the country that we researched and went into, I was finding that what was for sale were our middle school kids, and what was for sale, who was driving the market were these men, and mostly men, not total. And the child was sometimes a boy, sometimes a girl, but it was American. And these weren't across borders. Now, I had thought, because I had hired interpreters, I'd set up the research projects as if I'd have to deal with multiple populations, and that was somewhat, but not very much. What I found, they spoke middle school American girl. And that was just plain a shock. Now, when I looked at the group, and this is where I believe we should celebrate, I look at the group of the 1910 passage of the first federal act called the Mann Act. It was who we are today and who we're being called to be today. It was the superintendent of the Vigilance Association, Ernest Bell. It was, and he was actually over the Midnight Mission in Chicago. It was Edwin W. Sims, United States District Attorney of Chicago, Clifford Rowe, State Attorney of Cook County, Illinois, Dr. William Belfield, Professor of Rush Medical College, and alongside of them, and not down the road, but in the middle of the fray, was Lucy Hall, a deaconess of the Methodist Episcopal Church, Melbourne Boynton, pastor Lexington Baptist Church, and Florence Mabel Dedrick, the Moody Church. Now, that is what we're doing today all over the United States and what we're really excited about. And I just love the last presentation. I love your group, because what you're doing is equipping well the saints. And that sounds odd to some of you that don't come from the faith community. I do, but we call them saints and kind of hold our tongue because we know we're all flawed and broken. But equipping people to do it right, and I really do commend you. But this group raised the banner, and they yelled, they marched, they invaded the brothels, they went to the places that were called resorts, where the men who were really, really, really buying sex, and they called them resorts because if they called them brothels, it didn't sound as good. And they went into those places. They helped pass the federal law, the first law called the Mann Act. They literally went in and invaded and shone light into these areas. They were kicked out. They were carried out. And that could be everyone from the U.S. Attorney on. They stirred up a stink. Now, I think we're at a different point in that we can do it right. They had to break down, it's a different right today. They had to break down the doors. Talking nice didn't work. So you find some of us fighting the CDA, fighting to make sure that we end up with a very strong law that protects our kids online. It is a street fight right now, and some of us are up to our elbows and our nose in that fight. But often you saw behind the scenes in this original movement, people that went from church to church. You saw people that went and sat through hearings at the U.S. Senate. And all of those people were there to do one thing. I was going to show the book today, and I realized we're not where we can do that. But I want to read the front page of it. You open it up, and it says, a complete and detailed account of the shameless trafficking in young girls and boys and methods by which the procurers and panders lure innocent young girls away from home and sell them to keepers of the dives. Then it goes on and says, how to save your girl, how to save your boy. And then it goes on and says, what you can do to help wipe out this curse of humanity. And here's the bottom line. This is a book designed to awaken the sleeping and protect the innocent. Now, I want to get in the book to a place and talk to you and leave the book, but for a moment I want to say that I commend these people. And you could see at the end of the book in 1910, when they got the copyright and published it, that it is giving you summaries of state by state. So they went from the federal government, like Shared Hope International works at the federal government level, and then it went state by state. And that is what Shared Hope does. We help write legal briefs and help pass bills in all 50 states to change the laws. They started doing that. And they started rescuing some, and they started changing a culture enough to start passing laws. But I think at the end of the book, it said it all. They had a long ways to go, as we do. They still called these girls fallen women. And there was still mention of the fact that men were just naughty men. And it was very clear that to change our culture today, we have to change the language. And we hear people all over the United States, many of you listening that are advocates and leaders out there, you know this. We just turned green at Shared Hope International if you use the word child prostitute. You use child prostitute, we go, what? You're labeling this child with the crime committed against her. Well, we commend those that came before us, and we are thankful that they passed an initial law, and we're thankful that they ended up with bills and laws throughout the United States. But we still live in the culture that uses the word John, kind of like a naughty boy, and arrests kids for the crime committed against them in the majority of the states. So today what I want to bring to you, and many of you have been to the JUST conference with the other 900,000 people that come together to be trained by Shared Hope, and all these great people that come together. You know what we do, you know we still have villages around the world, but I want to focus on something in America again today. We still have 27 states that allow a child to be arrested for the crime committed against him or her. And even though we had a victory lap that we finally have a penalty for men in every state who buy sex with kids, and that's great, our culture still is allowing them not to get the penalty they should have. And we still can't be comfortable that every jury would understand this issue, even if we got it to court. We've got a long way to go. So what can we do? Well, we've got online for you your legal brief for every state. So we're not everything. We don't want to be everything. I'm hearing wonderful things of people doing great things, but on this, we're good. We've got your legal brief. We know what your state law says. 41 points of law we grade it every year under what we call the Protected Innocence Challenge. We help you in the state. Some of you probably we've helped you. And we help you pass laws in 41 points of law. Now, I'm not going to go through those because you can see them. You can get the actual legal brief. It's going to be 40, 60 pages, something like that. You can get your report card in all 41 areas. We'll show you what you do and don't have. But what I want to talk about today is two areas that are the core of the report card. If we continue to take demand lightly, we'll continue to have services for children. So the two largest areas are these. The demand area has to be dealt with and aggressively, as well as having prevention, as well as the kids, or well, in this case, minors. So the Child Protective Service System, we have, I think it's 27 of 100 points, is right there in how do we deal with these kids as victims of a crime. But how can you treat them as a victim if in many states you arrest them? Many places, if you treat them as a criminal, they are denied by default and systems, or sometimes by the very law that won't allow victims of money and services to go to a criminal. We have to fix this, because if we continue to allow the child to be called a prostitute in the law or in the practice of the law, then we will continue to imply that John is just a naughty boy. So what we're asking you to do is go to your state, look and become familiar. You're not going to become lawyers. You don't have to be. We direct you to your state law changes, and you can inform yourself on the weaknesses and strengths of your law. Now, the other things that I think are the most important, and I'm taking you through a case in my mind. We lost something that it just drove me crazy, a case. And the bottom line is I was told by the prosecutor, I don't think we can get 100% of the jury. They're going to see their husbands, their sons. We need to have that jury educated. So today, anybody that's involved in strong awareness, by the way, networked awareness, working with your own team, your own task force in your area, not isolated awareness, because then you're just a lone voice out there in the woods. You need to coordinate those awareness efforts, but it is vital that you do that. And so what I want to say to you today is we have materials for you. A big percentage of our materials are free. We have a prevention video for the jury, and it's called Chosen. And what it does is two trafficked minors. One was 13 when she was trafficked, the other was 18. She was 17 when they started. They tell how the traffickers work. We've designed this. I'm the producer because I believe I would never want anything to entice another person. It is not sexual, but they tell how the traffickers work. You can take it into your youth group. You can take it into your community group. It is designed in a faith kit also that everyone will get at the Faith Summit in June that you can see online. You've asked for that, we're doing it. We were asked for that at the Just Conference. We've been asked to hold something for people of faith. It is coming up in Minnesota in June. But at that event, and actually we have them available now, is a faith kit for your community of faith, of church, of whatever you call it. And in it, I made a decision that it was time to have you teach what God says. So if you believe there is one God, this will work for you. And what does God say? Each individual is precious and should never be labeled as something other than who God made them. Don't give them a label and devalue them. But there's a 4-part Bible study, and each of men, women, youth, and faith leaders. And each of those can take their own flash drive, their own books, and we give you PDFs so you can copy as many as you want. You could have a church of 40,000 and you could have a church of 40. And you're going to be able to scale this. It also gives you community outreach tools to add to what you've heard so many wonderful things about today. What you can do is you can go into that tool in your flash drive and you can get what's called like an American market. It'll walk you through the underside. And it's really difficult to see the buying and selling. You're going to see pimps. You're going to see men buying. This is all a part of the undercover research we did. You're also going to see some challenging pieces in there that will challenge you to take action. And with that, I want to say, I want all of you to join. And the little book I was going to show you, and if you want to just email me at linda.smith@sharedhope.org and say, I want to know about that book, or I want material, Linda. I want Congress to the Brothel. By the way, that's a book I will give to you. It gives my faith testimony for those that are interested, and a walk through my first 10 years of running Shared Hope. But when you ask for that, you're going to see, if you look at the front of that book, it says by General Booth. The biggest words on the book are, for God's sake, do something. So for all of you today that are doing something, bless you. And for you that are just thinking about it, do something.
Excellent, Representative Smith. I think I can't say it any better than 2 of our participants. Christine said, thank you. And Kate said, amen. So I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you so much for what you shared and the amazing perspective and the work that you all are doing. Representative Smith, let me come back to you real quick with one question. I'm going to come back with a question to each of our presenters since we're going to run a little bit over on time. So I just ask everybody to stay with us. Melanie noted, one of our participants today, she said, what if I'm told by others that human trafficking isn't a problem in my community? How can they help people understand that this is really a challenge that affects every community, and really where any one person is being harmed, then that's something we should care about and really focus on as a community? What advice would you give Melanie, who's being told by others that human trafficking is not a problem in her community?
Quite often what I give them is their state report card and something that I will pull up a case in their state and say, you must be kidding. Because every day on Google, I will Google and look at the cases all over the United States and the arrests and the ages of kids and the women. And so you can pull that up. You can find that. Do your research, pull it up, take a look at it. It's current. The other thing that I often do is I wrote a little book. It's it'd probably take you 3 hours to read it. It's called Renting Lacey. And what I do there is I take you into the underworld by writing characters based on real trafficked girls that I've worked with. And so I let them read it and I let them understand it through the research, and it's usually they understand then. But I would give them information. I would compel them to look for themselves, but I'd have my own little packet based on my own home area with clippings and information that's pertinent to your home. Not hard to find, just do a little due diligence. And then you can pull up your report card of the laws, the strength of the laws, and what's missing. Because you know, if you don't have a strong demand law, and you don't have a strong law for the girls and the boys that are being trafficked, you'll have trafficking. You can go online too, and you can, and I don't know if I recommend this, but I sometimes go on and I'll pull all the people for sale in an area by going to some of the websites that have sales, like Backpage or Craigslist, and I can pull up hundreds in most areas any one day at any one time.
Yeah, it's certainly something that affects all of our communities, and increasing awareness about some of those challenges, looking at your state report card, looking at information about how what's going on. It certainly was an awareness process for me, learning that human trafficking was a problem in my community, and it kind of changed how I saw things and made me more aware of the darkness, the shadows that are in my community, and making sure that we know about that and increase our awareness so that we can work to kind of bring about some solutions. Ashley, let me come to you next. We've had a question from Mary Louise. She asked how she could find training in her community so she could learn more. But I know something else you guys provide is a groups that are working in the community that individuals on the call might be able to connect with and kind of support ongoing work in their community in addition to training. So not just attending training, but also really getting into the work with groups that are working in their community. So how would you suggest people find either training or groups that they can connect with in their local community?
Certainly. So if there is a coalition or a state task force or a county task force, you could reach out to them and ask them who would they consider their vetted partners in the community. Or in your county, et cetera. You can also email us on our website. If you go to our website, there's a contact form. You can email us where you're at and what organization you represent and what you're looking to connect to. We'll be very happy to be responsive as fast as we can on those kinds of requests. I introduce you to great people working in your community. And then, of course, most of our resources that you can go through on our website will help you unearth that for yourself. It will show you how to figure out the answer to those questions. We find that most organizations working in the community really only know about a handful of the others. And so if you're very passionate about trying to figure out everyone who's working on this issue in your community, you walk through that community assessment and you end up creating a resource that's going to be very helpful to everyone in your community working on this too.
Thanks so much, Ashley and Lucy, for both of your guys' presentation today. It was amazing. Let me come back around to Catherine from the Office of Trafficking in Persons. Again, thank you for your presentation as well. Two-part question here. I want to make sure people have the hotline one more time so they know where to direct people for support and activities. Really, as well as, Catherine, can you help make sure we all know what are some of the signs that someone's being trafficked, and so that we can have that awareness kind of as we go out into the world, and then making sure we know how best to approach someone who may be being trafficked. So awareness of the hotline, how to approach someone, and what are some of the warning signs?
Okay, so there are a number of ways to get in touch with the hotline. You can call them at 1-888-373-7888 if you just plug it into your phones in case you ever need it. And that hotline is available 24/7, more than 170 languages. It's confidential. You could also go to the their website, humantraffickinghotline.org. There are a number of resources there, statistics on the types of calls coming in at the state level, the types of human trafficking that are reported into the hotline, because trafficking impacts all sorts of industries and venues and markets, both legal industries but also illicit ones as well. There is a new texting function of the hotline that also started earlier this year. And you can go on the website to find that. And there'll be a rollout of some social media functions. In regards to the red flags for human trafficking, because of the diversity of trafficking that impacts foreign nationals, U.S. citizens, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, whether it's in brothels or on the street or in strip clubs or construction or nail salons, agriculture, domestic work. It really depends on the type of trafficking, and then there are red flags that are unique to each venue of trafficking. But then there's also some universal signs that you can find on the hotline's website.
Great. And that's something for all of us to kind of go. It's another reason to go to the hotline website to look at that and to make sure that we are aware of those things so that we can move accordingly. I want to again thank everyone so much for participating on our webinar today. Big thanks to our presenters who shared such amazing information and are doing such great work here in federal government as well as out in the community. As a part of this webinar, we will be sending a follow-up information with links to some of the information that I think will answer some additional questions that have come in. And so glad to provide those links to everyone where they can access more information as well as get access to some of the materials that will be becoming available in the near future. And so thank you so much, everyone, for participating on the call today. Thank you for our presenters again, and we look forward to working with you all to address human trafficking in each of our communities to serve and support those in need. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.